Jonathan Holt sat across from Mr. Adams, his family lawyer, in a dimly lit office that smelled of old books and leather. Mr. Adams slid an envelope across the desk with a sense of gravity. "This came for you, Jonathan, from a Mr. Albert Granger. Apparently, he was a distant relative of yours." Jonathan, who had spent most of his life delving into the pasts of ancient civilizations, never expected his own family's history to come calling. He sliced open the envelope with a letter opener, his curiosity piqued. "A mansion, you say? How distant are we talking?" Jonathan asked, his eyes scanning the document. "Quite distant, I believe. It seems Mr. Granger had no direct heirs. The property has been maintained by a trust, but you are the last in the lineage," Mr. Adams explained, adjusting his glasses. "And he just left it all to me? Just like that?" "It appears so. You might want to see the place before making any decisions. It's not every day one inherits a mansion." Chuckling, Jonathan stood up, his mind racing with possibilities. "A mansion? It sounds like the beginning of a mystery novel or a horror story," Mr. Adams added with a smirk. "Will you go?" "I think I must. This could be quite the adventure." 2 days later, Jonathan drove up the winding path that led to his new estate. The mansion loomed ahead, its imposing Gothic architecture casting a long shadow in the setting sun. As he parked his car, he noticed another vehicle already there, a sleek, modern contrast to the aged manor. A man stepped out of the vehicle, about Jonathan's age, with a friendly smile and an outstretched hand. "Hello. You must be Mr. Holt. I'm David Archer, the caretaker around here. Nice to meet you, David. This place is rather overwhelming." David laughed, leading Jonathan up the steps. "It can be quite a lot to take in. But don't worry, she's a grand old lady. Treat her right, and she'll do the same for you." As they entered the grand foyer, Jonathan was struck by the sheer scale of the interior. The chandeliers, the sprawling staircase, and the velvet drapes all spoke of a bygone era. "So, what's the catch, David?" "There's always a catch with these things," Jonathan joked as they walked through the halls. "Well, the mansion is old, and with age comes quirks. Odd noises at night. Some say they see flickers of shadows moving. But it's all just part of her charm," David said with a slight grin. Jonathan stopped by a large portrait, studying the face of a stern-looking man. Albert Granger, presumably. "He was a bit of a recluse," David continued. "Loved this place, though, more than people, it would seem." As they continued the tour, Jonathan's mind was already racing with questions about the mansion's history, its previous owner, and what secrets it might hold. "Tomorrow, I'll start digging into Mr. Granger's past. There's always more to these stories, don't you think?" Jonathan said, more to himself than to David. "Absolutely," David replied. "And I'll be here to help. This old house could use some lively company for a change." Jonathan smiled, feeling an unexpected sense of belonging. The mystery of the mansion intrigued him, yes, but it was the possibility of connection, of piecing together lost stories, that truly excited him. As night fell over the estate, the adventure was just beginning. After a restless night, Jonathan met David in the grand dining hall for breakfast. The morning light streamed through the stained glass, casting colorful patterns on the stone floor. As they ate, Jonathan's thoughts returned to the mysteries of the mansion. "So, David, what do you know about the supernatural? Ever experienced anything out of the ordinary here?" Jonathan asked, a hint of skepticism in his voice. David paused, a sly smile forming. "Well, now that you mention it, there have been stories. The locals say the mansion is haunted. Not that I've seen a ghost myself, but there are nights when even I feel a chill I can't quite explain." Jonathan chuckled. "Haunted, you say? That does add a certain allure. Maybe I'll encounter a ghost or two. Perhaps you will at that. Just be careful what you wish for," David replied, collecting their plates. Later that day, they ventured to the heart of the mansion, where dusty covers draped over furniture and portraits of long-gone relatives lined the walls. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and mystery. Jonathan stopped before a heavy wooden door at the end of a corridor. "What's in here?" he asked, reaching for the handle. "That's the old master's bedroom. It's been locked for years. Mr. Granger was particularly strict about keeping it undisturbed," David said, a note of caution in his voice. Curiosity piqued. Jonathan pushed the door open. The room was shrouded in shadows, save for the light that spilled in through the cracked curtains. As his eyes adjusted, he saw a figure sitting on the massive four-poster bed. Jonathan froze, his heart racing. "Hello? Who's there?" The figure turned, revealing a woman with piercing red eyes and an unervingly serene smile. "Ah, the new master has arrived. Welcome, Jonathan Holt. I've been expecting you." David gasped, stepping behind Jonathan. You're real?" She stood gracefully, her movements fluid and unnaturally poised. "Indeed, I am very real. My name is Seraphine, and as per an ancient agreement, I am bound to this house. And now, to its master." Jonathan, though startled, found his voice. "Bound to the house? What does that mean exactly?" Seraphine approached, her gaze locked onto his. "It means that I am yours, and in a way, you are mine. Our fates are intertwined as long as you reside here." David, pale and clearly shaken, whispered to Jonathan, "This is beyond anything I expected. Are you all right with this?" Jonathan, ever the seeker of truths, nodded slowly. "I need to understand this. How did this come to be? What are you exactly?" "A succubus, Jonathan, bound by blood and magic to serve and protect the master of this mansion. This pact has existed for centuries, crafted by one of your ancestors. I am here to ensure the prosperity and safety of the house's lord," Seraphine explained, her voice a soothing melody. "And what if I refuse this arrangement?" Jonathan asked, his mind racing with the implications of her words. "That is your right, but know that refusing would break the pact and free me." "Yet the mansion might not take kindly to the breaking of old bonds," she replied, her eyes darkening with a warning. Jonathan looked to David, seeking any sign of objection. David only nodded, as if to say the decision was Jonathan's alone. "Then I will need time to think on this," Jonathan concluded, his gaze drifting around the room, taking in the surreal situation. "Of course," Seraphine said, bowing slightly. "I will give you the space you need. But remember, I am here when you decide." As they left the room, David clapped Jonathan on the shoulder. "Well, this is more than anyone could have expected. Are you all right?" Jonathan sighed, his mind awash with ancient pacts and unearthly beings. "I think I am, and I think I'm going to need all the help I can get to understand what I've just walked into." Together, they walked back towards the light, the weight of history and the unknown pressing close behind them. The next morning, after a night filled with more questions than sleep, Jonathan and David gathered in the mansion's expansive library. Books and manuscripts towered around them, laden with dust and secrets. "All right, David, we need to find out everything we can about this pact," Jonathan said, rolling up his sleeves as he approached a large oak table scattered with old books. David nodded, pulling a few thick volumes from the shelves. "I'll start with the history of the house and any mentions of unusual agreements or rituals." As they dug through the texts, the air was thick with the musty scent of ancient paper. Hours passed, and finally, Jonathan's hand paused on a faded manuscript titled Chronicles of the Granger Lineage. "David, come look at this," Jonathan called out, his voice tinged with excitement. David hurried over, peering over Jonathan's shoulder. The manuscript was handwritten, the script elegant but difficult to decipher. It mentions a guardian pact made by Theodore Granger in the 1700s, meant to protect his lineage with the aid of a demonic entity. Jonathan read aloud, his eyes widening. "Demonic entity? That must be Seraphine," David murmured, a chill running down his spine. Jonathan flipped the page, revealing a detailed drawing of a ritual. "It says here that the pact was sealed with a personal artifact of immense value to the master of the house, something that binds the entity to the family. Do you think that artifact is still around?" "Maybe it's hidden somewhere in the mansion," David suggested, his mind racing with possibilities. "That's our next step. We need to find that artifact. It could be key to understanding how to handle Seraphine," Jonathan decided, closing the book with a sense of purpose. The two men spent the rest of the day searching the mansion, exploring hidden corners and forgotten rooms. In the late afternoon, in a dusty attic room, David stumbled upon an old chest. "Jonathan, look at this," he shouted, wiping away layers of dust. Jonathan rushed over, and together they opened the chest. Inside, amidst various antique trinkets, lay a small, intricately carved box. Carefully, Jonathan lifted the box, feeling a surge of energy as he touched it. "This has to be it." He opened the box, revealing a dark, opalescent stone that seemed to absorb the light around it. "The heart of the pact," he whispered. As they examined the artifact, footsteps echoed up the attic stairs, and Seraphine appeared at the door. Her expression was unreadable. "I see you have found the heart of our pact," she said, her voice neutral, yet carrying an undercurrent of emotion. Jonathan held up the stone. "Yes, we found it. Seraphine, we want to understand. Why are you bound to this? What does it truly mean for you?" Seraphine stepped into the room, her gaze fixed on the stone. "That artifact is my bond to this house, and to the master of it. It holds part of my essence, captured during the ritual. As long as it exists, so does the pact." David looked between them, sensing the gravity of the situation. "What happens if we break the pact? What happens to you?" Seraphine paused, her eyes softening. "To break the pact would free me, but it would also mean I must return to my realm, never to interact with this world again. But it is your choice as the current master." Jonathan clenched the stone, feeling its cold power. I need to think about this. About what's right?" "Of course," Seraphine said, bowing slightly. "I will respect whatever decision you make." As she left, Jonathan turned to David, the weight of his responsibility clear in his eyes. "This isn't just about an old house or a forgotten legacy. It's about her too." David nodded in agreement. "We'll figure this out together." Together, they returned to the library, the artifact in hand, ready to delve deeper into the history and make a decision that would affect more than just the mansion, but the very fabric of their intertwined destinies. Late one evening, as a storm brewed outside, casting jagged shadows through the mansion's stained-glass windows, Jonathan and David sat in the warmth of the study. Logs crackled in the fireplace, the room bathed in a soft, flickering light. "So, what's our next move with the artifact?" David asked, nursing a cup of tea. Jonathan looked up from a massive leather-bound tome. "I think understanding this pact further might help. Maybe there's a way to alter it. Change the terms so Seraphine isn't bound against her will." David nodded. "That sounds honorable. But how do we even start something like that?" As they pondered, footsteps approached, and Seraphine entered, her presence changing the air in the room. "Good evening, gentlemen. Discussing my fate? Are we?" Jonathan set his book aside. "Yes, actually. Seraphine, we want to find a way to possibly amend the pact. You shouldn't be forced to serve." Seraphine perched on the arm of a nearby chair, her demeanor thoughtful. "Amending the pact. It's not simple. The magic that binds me is old and complex, woven by a master sorcerer." "Is there anything you can tell us about this sorcerer?" "Maybe there's a clue in his identity," David suggested. "The sorcerer was a distant relative of yours, Jonathan. A man of great power and ambition. He left behind a series of journals. Perhaps they contain what you seek," Seraphine replied. Jonathan's eyes lit up. "Journals? Are they here in the mansion?" "They are hidden within a secret chamber. I can show you," she offered. Minutes later, they were descending a narrow staircase behind a moving bookshelf, the oldest part of the mansion. They arrived at a dusty room filled with scrolls and books. At the center, a stone pedestal held a stack of worn leather journals. Jonathan carefully opened the top journal. The pages yellowed with age. These could hold the answers. As he read, Seraphine and David looked over his shoulder. The journal detailed magical theories and spells, but one entry stood out: a diagram of the ritual used to bind Seraphine, annotated with notes on possible modifications. "Look here," Jonathan pointed. "It mentions releasing the bond with mutual consent. That might be what we need." "Mutual consent," Seraphine mused. "That implies respect and agreement on both sides. It's possible, then, to change the terms." David looked from the journal to Seraphine. "What would you want, Seraphine? If you could decide." Her gaze was distant. "Freedom to choose. To stay or go as I please. not because I am compelled. Jonathan closed the journal decisive. Then let's find a way to make that happen. Let's alter the pact. They spent hours discussing potential modifications, guided by the old texts. The storm outside faded to a whisper, and as dawn approached, they had formulated a plan based on ancient magic and new understanding. We'll need to prepare. This kind of magic is not to be taken lightly, Jonathan said, looking to both David and Seraphine. I'll help in any way I can, David agreed. And I will provide the knowledge and power necessary, Seraphine added, a faint smile crossing her lips. As the first light of dawn filtered into the room, the three stood together, united by a common goal. They were no longer just a man, his assistant, and a bound entity, but partners, each playing a role in crafting a new future. With a renewed sense of purpose, they returned to the study to plan. Today, they were researchers and scholars, but tomorrow, they would be practitioners of ancient arts, each step bringing them closer to a bond defined not by necessity, but by choice and mutual respect. The following morning, Jonathan, David, and Seraphine convened in the library, surrounded by open books and scrolls, the air thick with anticipation and the musty scent of old paper. They had agreed to delve deeper into the mansion's arcane secrets, hoping to uncover anything that might aid their efforts to amend the pact. Okay, we know the ritual requires precise conditions. We need to understand the symbols and the ingredients listed here, Jonathan said, pointing at an ancient text sprawled open on the table. David, squinting at the faded script, nodded. Some of these symbols resemble those in the crypt downstairs. Maybe there's a connection. Should we take a look? Jonathan suggested, already standing, his academic curiosity piqued. Let's do it, David agreed, grabbing a flashlight. Seraphine led the way, her presence a calming force as they descended into the darker, less trodden parts of the mansion. The crypt was cold and silent, the air stale with the weight of undisturbed centuries. Along the walls, carvings and frescoes depicted various mystical symbols and rites. David shone the flashlight over the symbols, matching them to the drawings in the book. Look, this one here, it's identical to the diagram we need to understand for the ritual. Jonathan took pictures with his camera. We'll need to translate these. They might give us insight into how the original pact was formed. As they documented the symbols, Seraphine touched the cold stone wall, her expression somber. This place holds more than just the remains of your ancestors, Jonathan. It holds the remnants of their power. Could this power be used to help us with the ritual? Jonathan asked, intrigued by the thought. Possibly, Seraphine replied. But we must be cautious. Such power can be unpredictable. Back in the library, they spread out their findings, comparing the crypt's symbols with the ancient texts. The hours slipped by as they pieced together the complex puzzle. We need an expert in ancient languages, Jonathan finally declared, rubbing his tired eyes. I know someone, David chimed in, an old professor of mine from the university. He specializes in arcane symbols and rites. Could you contact him? Jonathan asked, hopeful. David nodded and stepped aside to make the call. Moments later, he returned with a grin. He's intrigued and willing to come over tomorrow. That's great news, Jonathan exclaimed. With his help, we might just pull this off. As they prepared for the arrival of David's professor, Seraphine arranged the artifacts and texts they would need to show him. Her efficiency and knowledge of the mansion's hidden treasures were invaluable. The next day, Professor Larkin arrived, a sprightly old man with a keen eye and a gentle demeanor. After introductions, they got straight to work. Professor Larkin examined the symbols and the ritual diagram with expert eyes. Fascinating. These are indeed very ancient and powerful. You're looking to amend a pact? A bold undertaking. Yes, Jonathan replied. We believe it's the right thing to do. Indeed, it is noble. Let's see what we can decipher together, Professor Larkin said, adjusting his glasses. Throughout the day, they translated and interpreted, their collaboration revealing not only the meanings of the symbols, but also the intentions behind them. It appears the original pact was designed to be binding, but not unalterable, Professor Larkin explained. Your ancestor left room for evolution, a way to adapt the pact as times changed. That's exactly what we need, Jonathan said, relief and excitement in his voice. With Professor Larkin's help, they drafted a new version of the ritual, one that would allow Seraphine to choose her path freely, yet still offer her protection and connection to the mansion if she desired. As evening approached, they reviewed their plan, confident in their preparations. "Tomorrow, we perform the ritual," Jonathan declared. "Together," added Seraphine, her voice steady and strong. "Together," echoed David, a smile spreading across his face. They had uncovered the secrets held within the mansion's walls, and now they stood ready to forge a new future, one of mutual respect and chosen bonds. The final challenge awaited them with the dawn. Under the light of a full moon, Jonathan, David, and Seraphine prepared the grand hall for the ritual that would decide Seraphine's fate. They arranged candles in a precise pattern around the room, each candle flickering softly, casting long shadows against the ancient walls. "Everything must be exact," Seraphine instructed, her voice echoing slightly in the vast space. "The alignment of the candles with the moon's light is crucial." Jonathan carefully checked the placement of each candle against the diagram they had prepared. "How are you feeling about all this?" he asked Seraphine, looking up from his task. "I am hopeful," she replied, her usual composure tinged with a trace of emotion. "Tonight will mark the end of one chapter and the beginning of another, whatever the outcome." David, who was arranging the last of the ritual symbols, nodded in agreement. "We've got everything set just right. This is going to work." Once everything was in place, they stood back to review their work. The hall, bathed in moonlight and candlelight, held a serene yet powerful atmosphere. "Are we ready to begin?" Jonathan asked, his voice steady despite the palpable tension in the air. Seraphine took a deep breath. "Yes, we are ready." Jonathan began the ritual, reciting the ancient words they had translated. His voice grew more confident with each line, the language of the old magic flowing through him more smoothly than he had anticipated. David and Seraphine joined in, their voices harmonizing with Jonathan's, filling the hall with the power of their united call. The air around them seemed to thrum with energy, the candles' flames dancing more vigorously. As the ritual reached its climax, Seraphine stepped into the center of the circle, her figure illuminated by the candlelight. She held the opalescent stone, the heart of the pact, high above her head. "Now," she called out, her voice commanding and clear. Jonathan and David watched in awe as a soft, ethereal light enveloped Seraphine. The stone in her hands glowed brightly, its light pulsing with her heartbeat. With a final chant, Seraphine lowered the stone, placing it gently on the ground at the center of the circle. The light surged outward, washing over everyone in the room, its warmth enveloping them like a comforting blanket. As the light faded, the candles flickered one last time and then settled. The room fell silent, the ritual complete. Jonathan stepped forward, offering his hand to Seraphine. "Did it work? Are you free to choose?" Seraphine took his hand, her touch warm. "Yes, I can feel it. The bond has changed. Now it connects us, but does not bind me. I am free to choose." David let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "That's incredible. I mean, we hoped, but to actually see it..." Seraphine smiled, her eyes meeting Jonathan's. "I choose to stay, not as a servant bound by old magic, but as an ally, a protector of this house by choice." Jonathan felt a rush of relief and happiness. "I'm glad. We make a good team, it seems." "Yes, we do," Seraphine agreed, her smile broadening. They spent the rest of the night talking about the future, about what this new chapter would mean for them all. The mansion, once a place of secrets and bindings, now felt like a home, a sanctuary where old magic and new hopes mingled freely. As dawn approached, they extinguished the last candle, the early morning light beginning to stream through the windows. They left the grand hall together, a sense of accomplishment and anticipation for the future lighting their way. The night would be remembered not only for the magic that had freed Seraphine, but for the bonds of friendship and trust that had been strengthened among them. They had faced the unknown together, and together, they would move forward into whatever the future held. The morning after the ritual, the mansion seemed to hum with renewed energy. Sunlight poured through the windows, illuminating every corner as if celebrating the transformation that had taken place. Jonathan, David, and Seraphine gathered in the library to discuss what came next. "So, what now?" David asked, leaning back in his chair. "I mean, we've broken the old pact and made something new. But what does that mean for this place?" Jonathan looked around the library, his gaze lingering on the countless books that filled the shelves. "It means we have a chance to redefine what this house is. It doesn't have to be just a relic of the past. It could be alive again." Seraphine nodded, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "The mansion holds power, Jonathan, and a history that stretches across centuries. If we work together, we can preserve its legacy while making it a place of knowledge and growth." David grinned. "A sort of research hub? With you two running it, it could attract scholars, historians, and even curious wanderers." "That's exactly what I was thinking," Jonathan said, his excitement growing. "There's so much here: artifacts, books, the architecture itself. It could be a place where the past meets the present." "And what about the less conventional aspects?" David asked, gesturing towards Seraphine. Seraphine smiled faintly. "The magic of this house is not something to fear. It could be a guide, a tool for understanding the unknown. But it must be respected. That will be our responsibility." Jonathan leaned forward, a plan beginning to take shape. "We'll need to catalog everything, start organizing the library, and make this place more accessible. David, you've got experience with logistics. Can you help with that?" "Absolutely," David replied. "I'll start drawing up plans for what we'll need: supplies, renovations, maybe even some staff." "Good," Jonathan said. He turned to Seraphine. "And you? What role would you like to play in all of this?" Seraphine's expression softened. "I'll be here to guide and protect, as I always have. But this time it will be by choice, not obligation. I'll also share what I know about the mansion's history and its connection to the magical world." Jonathan smiled. "That sounds perfect." As they talked, the three of them began to sketch out their vision for the mansion's future. The once isolated house would become a place of discovery and connection, open to those who sought to learn and explore. By midday, they had their first steps outlined. David would oversee renovations, Jonathan would begin cataloging the mansion's artifacts and documents, and Seraphine would assist in identifying the magical aspects of the property. As they stood in the sunlight-filled hall, Jonathan felt a sense of purpose unlike anything he'd ever known. "This is going to work," he said, looking at his companions. "Together, we can make this place extraordinary." David clapped him on the back. "Let's get started then." Seraphine's smile widened. "Yes, let's." With that, they set off, ready to breathe new life into the mansion and its legacy. Together, they were building something extraordinary, something that would endure. A month had passed since the night of the ritual, and the mansion had undergone a transformation. The dust and silence of its long abandonment had been replaced with activity and purpose. The grand halls bustled with restoration work. The library had begun to take shape as a proper archive, and the mansion's secrets were being carefully cataloged. Jonathan and David stood in the library, poring over a detailed blueprint of the mansion. David tapped his pen against the edge of the table, a wide grin on his face. "I have to say, this place looks nothing like it did when we first arrived," David said. "The workers are finishing the east wing tomorrow, and the main hall renovations are ahead of schedule." Jonathan smiled, leaning over the blueprint. "That's great news. Once the east wing is ready, we can move some of the artifacts out of storage and start organizing them properly." David smirked. "You've turned into quite the museum curator." "Hardly," Jonathan said with a laugh. "But I'm enjoying this more than I ever thought I would. There's something satisfying about bringing this place back to life." As they spoke, Seraphine entered the room, her presence immediately drawing their attention. She carried a worn book in her hands, her expression serene. "I found something you'll want to see," she said, placing the book on the table between them. "It's a journal written by one of your ancestors, Jonathan. It details their explorations of the magical artifacts housed here." Jonathan's eyes lit up as he opened the journal. "This could be invaluable." "Thank you, Seraphine." David leaned over to glance at the pages. "It's incredible how much history this place holds. Every time, I think we've uncovered it all. Something new turns up. That's the nature of the mansion, Seraphine said with a gentle smile. It's a living entity in its own way, always revealing itself to those who seek to understand it. Jonathan looked up from the journal, meeting Seraphine's gaze. And what about you? How are you finding this new chapter? She hesitated for a moment, then said, I am content. For the first time in centuries, I feel as though I belong here by choice, not obligation. And that is because of you. David grinned, sensing the deepening connection between them. All right, I'll leave you two to discuss whatever it is you need to discuss. I'll check on the workers in the East Wing. After David left, Jonathan turned to Seraphine, his voice softer. You've done so much for this house and for me. I can't imagine this place without you. And I can't imagine leaving, she said, stepping closer. I chose to stay not only for the mansion, but for you, Jonathan. You've shown me a kindness and respect I had long forgotten. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of their words settling between them. Jonathan finally spoke, his voice steady. Then let's build this place together, not just as a house or a legacy, but as a home. Seraphine's smile deepened. A home. I like that. As the sun set over the mansion, casting golden light across the grounds, Jonathan and Seraphine stood together, ready to face whatever came next. The mansion was no longer just a relic of the past. It was a symbol of the choices they had made and the future they would build together.